This time around on Q&A Saturday, I'm going to talk about productivity philosophies, sleep schedules, and my favorite productivity apps for your smartphone. Let's go. Here we are, Q&A Saturday, and I've got a lot to talk about today, so let's just get started. Every single Saturday, I answer questions that are sent to me via Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, wherever you want, email. I've got my members community to ask questions, all that kind of stuff. I answer them on this very show, so be sure to subscribe and get the notification bell, ding that ding, ding that thing? Ding that thing. That way you don't miss a single episode. Okay, so let's get to the questions. First question comes from Eddie Hope on Twitter. Eddie writes, what are your top 3 must-have productivity apps for your smartphone? Thanks for the question, Eddie. The apps are tricky because, first off, smartphones, there's Android phones, there's Windows phones, there's iPhones. So that's one thing, but also apps come and go. I tend to focus on that stuff more with the members of my community and stuff like that inside of, we're building Total Time Crafting, so inside of there, because that way it kind of lives inside that space, but I have no problem kind of giving you the 3 that I believe are important. Probably the categories that you need to have covered are, obviously your to-do list application, your calendar application, and then you could say your email application or your note-taking application. I'm going to skip the calendar application because a lot of calendar applications are fairly consistent as long as you've got the ability to add things to it and stuff like that. A lot of them are the same, especially now that there's natural language and stuff on most of the apps. But if we go with the to-do list application first, I'm going to go with one that I believe is cross-platform, that has stood the test of time, so you could use it on Android, iPhone, it even worked for BlackBerry for a spell, and that is Todoist. I still use Todoist as my primary driver. I use Asana for my team-based stuff, but Todoist is still the one that I actually use for myself. In fact, I actually have a task in Todoist that says check Asana. Now, why do I still use Asana? Well, the reason is simple. A lot more people still use Asana in terms of team-based stuff, and it scales really well for larger teams. So that's why I still use Asana. But it's interesting that I have to go into Todoist and it says, hey, check Asana. So I do that. So I would say Todoist is probably bang for your buck, feature-wise, longevity-wise, scalability, simplicity. I think that Todoist is the one that I would go with. Now, in terms of email applications, they also come and go, which is kind of interesting. But the one that keeps coming back for me, and I'll give you 2 examples here. For iOS, I'm using Spark now by Redl, and the reason I'm using Spark is it's integrating nicely with my to-do list application, and there's the smart inboxes. I can do quick replies. I just really like it, and I don't spend a lot of time in email anyway. Now, Newton has come back from the grave, and my friend Francesco D'Alessio, who has the Keep Productive channel, which is one that if you're looking at apps, you should be looking at that channel for sure. I'll put a link to that in the description, so you can make sure you check out Francesco's channel. But Newton has come back, which used to be known as Cloud Magic. I still have a subscription to Newton, but again, whenever an app goes away, it kind of makes you a bit nervous, right? So I would say that if you're looking at an email app and you're on iOS, I would go with Spark. If you are looking for a more robust email app and you're on other platforms, then give Newton a look. I mean, there's a lot there, and the fact that it is back from the dead is really, really encouraging. Now, in terms of note-taking, Evernote would have been my choice, a long time ago and up until this year. But again, Notion is kind of making waves in the app ocean, so to speak. I've been playing with it. I've not dug into it as much as some of the other people that are out there. The functionality on mobile devices is not as robust as, say, on the desktop, but there's that cross-platform that I would look at as well. So again, if you're using different smartphones, whether it's iOS or Android, I would look at Notion as another great productivity app, mainly because it's super versatile. Now, again, you got to dig in and make it your own, but if you're willing to do that, I'd say Notion is a solid choice. I'll give you one bonus app that I like if you're an iOS user and you're a Mac user, Drafts. I love Drafts. It's made by Agile Tortoise. I use it for my writing. It's basically the place where every idea starts. I can connect it to a whole bunch of different apps. Drafts is worth looking at. Again, I'll link to that in the description as well as all of the other ones I've mentioned. So I want to thank you, Eddie, for that question. And if you've got more questions about apps, be sure to leave them in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer them in future instances of Q&A Saturday. Now let's move on to the next question. This question comes from David Galloway via Twitter. This is a long one, but let's give it a go. With so many competing productivity philosophies, how do you decide which ones to incorporate and which ones to ignore? Make Time, Atomic Habits, GTD, all of them offer valuable tools, but it's kind of like being a person who reads a lot of books about writing and never writes. David, great question. And, I'm teaching time crafting, which is another philosophy that you could look at. Yes, there's so many different options out there. There's the Covey method, there's RPM if you want to go way back to what Tony Robbins was teaching, and of course Getting Things Done by David Allen. And then some of the practices that are inside of like James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. I actually talked to James about Atomic Habits on the podcast recently, the weekly podcast. Again, I'll put a link to that in the description as well, so you can give a listen to that. And I haven't read Make Time yet, but again, there's so many options out there. I actually almost don't read as many as I used to for the very reason you mentioned. I want to make sure that I take action. I also don't want my own methodology to be too clouded or informed by somebody else's. Although I will say, over the decades, the decade that I've been doing this, yeah, I've definitely looked at other philosophies and said, hey, what works for me, what doesn't? It's kind of like that old adage that Bruce Lee said. I'm going to paraphrase it, but like absorb what's useful, discard what isn't, and add your own. That's, I believe, what you need to do. I think that at some point you need to say, hey, you know what? I've absorbed enough. And if you're getting to this point now, and it sounds like you are with this question, take the best of what you've read and apply it. I know some people, when they're doing time crafting, they love the idea of theming their time, but they're not so hot on the journaling or mode-based work. Some people who have been ardent followers of Getting Things Done love the mode-based work component that I have in time crafting, but they could do without the theming of the days because they figure their days are too dynamic and they can't really do that. And some just say, hey, you know what, I love the journaling component. I'm not adding that to the mix. I'll add that to my bullet journal aspect. In fact, James talks about his one-sentence journal that he puts in his new Clear Habits journal for Bear and Fig, the partnership that they did. Again, I'll link to that in the description. Lots of links in the description. Lots of links. But I think that, again, you have to look at the whole body of work that you've looked at and kind of say, hey, this works for me, this doesn't, and then just move forward with that. I think every productivity philosophy and methodology eventually becomes your own anyways, because certain things you won't follow through on. What I will say is that if you're adopting a methodology and it's one of those all or nothing methodologies where it feels like you have to do all the things in it, chances are it's not going to stand the test of time. So if you are adopting any kind of productivity philosophy or time management methodology, I encourage you to start slow. Do bit by bit by bit. I've kind of designed time crafting to be that way, where if you want to just theme your time initially and ignore the rest, you can, and you'll be incrementally more productive. Same thing if you want to just kind of toss aside the theming of the time and dive into mode-based work. Same principles apply. You don't need to do all of it to be more productive. And I think that's a slippery slope. When you start to do all of the things all at once, it's hard to adopt that mindset. So I'd say do it bit by bit. Maybe do a bit of a capture or in David Allen's terms, a brain dump, and say, hey, you know what? These are the things that I like about this methodology. These are the things I don't like, and then start to craft your own. I mean, I think that's ultimately what we want to do anyway, because even when business isn't personal, productivity always is. Okay, last question for this edition of Q&A Saturday comes from Cami Wolf, and Cami asked me to tell her about my sleeping schedule experiment and how it went. If you hadn't been following me on Instagram, which you can do, again, link in the description, I was trying to kind of make time work a little bit better for me and also help out my wife and with the kids and all that stuff. And the night owl stuff was starting to be a little bit of there was a barrier or some friction there. And ultimately what happened was I said, you know what, I'm going to start to do some segmented sleep. I'm going to try this polyphasic sleep schedule. There's this idea called second sleep, which we used to do way before electricity was a thing, and we had lighting at night. And if you don't know what second sleep is, it's basically you go to sleep when the sun went down, you go to sleep, and then you'd wake up in the middle of the night, and then you would do things between like 1 and 3 or 11 and 2. You'd get up, you'd write by candlelight, you'd read by candlelight, you'd maybe do some other things by candlelight, or no candlelight. NSFW. But we don't live in that era anymore, and I was struggling with it. I would wake up at 1 in the morning and try to work till 3, but again, I just find myself not really engaged. So I went to look back after a couple days and said, hey, you know what? What do people have to say, regarding night owls and this stuff? I'm going to look to some of the experts. And I came across an article that was called Time Management and Night Owls, and I'll link to that again in the description below. And as I read it, I'm like, this makes a lot of sense. And the author at one point mentioned, I've read this great book about night owls. And I thought, this is something that I want to dig into. Who wrote this book? Because I'm known as a night owl, and that's one of the things that I'm known for. And I said, who wrote it? Who beat me to the punch? And the author mentioned it was called The Night Owl Action Plan by Mike Vardy. And I thought, there you go. I'm taking advice from myself. So I had forgotten one of the tenets of time crafting, one of the parts that are in my way of the Productivityist Manifesto. Listen to your body clock. And once that happened, I killed the sleep experiment and decided, you know what, I'm going to just be more reasonable about it. I'm going to go to bed, between midnight and 1 a.m. I'm going to make sure that everything is set up the night before like I used to, but I'm going to take it a step further and, get things like my cereal set up for my son for his breakfast so that way, there's no push to get us ready to go. I'm going to be, a lot more conscious about it because there's new elements and it has had to evolve. So really my sleep schedule didn't need to evolve in terms of what time, just what I did before going to bed needed to evolve so that I could get up in the morning and start off the day successfully. So to answer Cammie's question, the sleep schedule experiment could have been viewed as a failure because I didn't change my sleep schedule, but I think it's a success because I learned that I was doing it right all along and just needed to make some subtle changes to keep the progress going the way I wanted it to. That's it for this edition of Q&A Saturday. Every Saturday I'm going to answer some questions, so if you have questions for next episode or the ones beyond, just put them in the comments. Whatever you want to ask related to time management, personal productivity, time crafting, apps, this is the place to do it. You can also ask me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. All the links are in the description. Until next time, I'll see you later.